Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic is getting your F&O environment ready for priority-based throttling. My name is Nina, and I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you're agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenter and need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Srinath Kannan, Principal Program Manager. Srinath, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Nina. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today and taking your time to join us for this session. I'm also joined by my counterparts, Sneh and Saurav from the engineering team, who are here to assist with any questions that you may have. So as Nina suggested, as I get through some of the content, feel free to post your questions and either Sneh or Saurav can actually monitor them and respond back to you. If not, at the end of the presentation, we'll just have a dedicated Q&A sessions, and at that time also you can continue to post your questions. So with that, let me get started. And what I want to do today in this session is to kind of quickly walk through the thinking process and the hypothesis so that we can connect the dots between why and how we are introducing these service protection settings in the F&O platform. I will then quickly walk through how you might be able to set up, validate, and test for, and take the necessary actions that you have to do in your environment in order to prepare yourself for this going GA later in the month or when you're ready to actually pick up the product update. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A. And as I said, feel free to post your questions and we'll continue to monitor them. So what I like to start is basically trying to connect the whole concept of infrastructure, constraints within infrastructure, and the bottlenecks that can be observed by connecting back to something that every one of us can actually relate to. So if you think of anything that is termed infrastructure, by some definition, there are always going to be constraints built into them. And the best way to recognize that is to look at our freeway and highway system, which plays a great example for connecting the dots as to why there are these service protection settings and throttling that we are introducing within the F&O. So as you can see from the picture on the left-hand side at the top, when you have these lanes within the freeway, and if it goes unmonitored, unchecked, there are potential opportunities for peak demand for those infrastructure. And as a result, you have more vehicles trying to enter the system or enter the freeway at a particular segment or point in time. And this can obviously have ripple effects in terms of congestion, gridlocks, and the worst case scenario is you are just standstill in the traffic and not making any progress because there are other vehicles and cars that are trying to either exit or come in and change lanes all at the same time. So you can actually take this and apply to our infrastructure as it relates to processing requests and workloads that are specific to your business. And there is going to be that business process curve in terms of time of the day, demand, any special conditions or any special period of the year where you're going to experience these sort of congestions. So as the freeway system introduced this ramp monitoring, it has evolved to become more intelligent over a period of time where it's constantly monitoring the health of that infrastructure and trying its best to avoid these congestions, taking some intelligent steps, right? So when they originally introduced, it used to have a constant, stop, go sort of a sign. But later on, with different signals becoming available, it was actually easier to dynamically adjust those wait times so that it can estimate when it expects the system to actually be able to handle more vehicles it would dynamically shift the time that is required in order for vehicles to sort of get in, right? So this is the similar mechanism through which we are introducing the throttling manager, where it's observing the system at any given time, collecting different signals, and accordingly adjusting how your system could perform if more requests were to be processed. But of course, in that terms, we are also introducing the convenience of telling the throttling manager that, hey, there are these some requests that in my system are high priority compared to others, so that as you observe availability of infrastructure and system health improving, please prioritize executing these requests prior to executing other requests that are coming in through the pipe, right? So that's kind of the way how I would want to connect and to kind of leave this as a way for you to understand how and what we are trying to do. Of course, this is our first step to improving, availability, reliability, and maintaining a high, health state of the environment. But we'll continue to work with you, collect feedback, observe data from our telemetry, and we'll be making continuous adjustments and updates to this. So with that said, I also wanted to sort of highlight what the team has observed over the last, close to a year or so as part of, the need for introducing the service protection settings. So, of course, we talked in the context of the ramp metering that by default, there is always going to be some implicit constraints within the system, which ends up basically overutilizing the resources that are available, which will ultimately lead to some constraints in terms of processing ability or even reducing the reliability and availability of an environment. So obviously, when some of that symptom is observed, it will lead to the system becoming busy, and that obviously has negative impact both in terms of performance, but more importantly, business impact in terms of your request taking much longer to process or potentially reduced throughput because of some constraints existing in the system for a prolonged period of state and unable to process more requests than it could actually process if things were a little bit normal within the system. And this can only lead to experiences like either timeouts or just random errors and crashes that you can happen. So obviously we want to avoid a lot of these things. So there is reinforcement usually built into these services and your own custom services by handling for retries. As I mentioned earlier also, with retries, some of the common patterns are always to look for some constant time in which you will retry the request, which probably could be 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever is the math there for the experience and the business process you're trying to support. But that constant polling can also introduce these symptoms back into the system or even exaggerate some of them if the underlying root cause of the environment is not mitigated within a reasonable amount of time. So essentially what that means is while your system is already loaded with a lot of requests or the resources are being consumed, and that results in some busy conditions and you're continuously trying to retry in a continuous polling mechanism, that can also kind of introduce the issue or make the issue much larger than what it is. So obviously all of this leads to some engagement with your own IT organization or engagement with Microsoft, and oftentimes trying to peel away these different layers at which systems are operating and trying to get to the root cause of it in terms of determining how this could be mitigated obviously is going to take much longer. So which is why we are trying to introduce the service protection plans, which will act as an aid in order to, in addition to other mechanisms we have to help mitigate your environment from making it more reliable, available, and also ensuring that your business processes and operations can actually adequately perform the required requests that are necessary in order for you to process them. Now, as we looked at it and as we looked at how we work with each one of you to help implement and provision the systems, we also think that these service protection settings act as a safeguard and a guardrail, if you will, to your existing environment. And the reason being that there is always differences that you see when you start engaging and trying to estimate what would be the right size for your environment to basically handle your interactive, non-interactive workloads. And that starts by some level of good estimation in terms of the workload and the growth rate of your request and business and et cetera, et cetera. So obviously all of this information is then fed in, and based on that, some kind of an environment is provisioned depending on what kind of capacity you need, the number of AO servers that you need, and all those things. But the reality starts to kick in when you actually are now servicing production workloads. And invariably, there was always going to be some differences in them. And even if that variance is small, over time, as your business grows, it's going to start to introduce a larger variance in that. So obviously, this is handled traditionally through monitoring. And every time you have an upgrade, you're always looking at doing performance and capacity and stress testing and whatnot. And we believe that by adding another layer of these service protection limits and giving the flexibility to adjust these relative priorities between the requests, we believe that this acts as a good complement to whatever you're doing in your environment today to maintain its health and state. So as a result, with these protection settings, when you set them, what we are introducing is essentially a way to monitor the systems, and when the throttling manager deems necessary that it needs to allow for system to break up any kind of constraints or congestion, the system will actually throw back an HTTP 429 response, which actually will also include a dynamic retry interval, so that you can use that value to actually retry that request again within that defined period of time. So as a result of introducing this is exactly what you have to be preparing for in terms of enabling for throttling in your environment, so that for the OData and the custom request that you are introducing in your system, you actually have this HTTP 429 handler. Or if you already have one of them, basically leverage the retry, the dynamic retry interval that we are offering in order for you to adjust those retry intervals within your system, so that you can avoid any kind of outright times out and failures, and gracefully sort of handle a retry logic in your system. Now, I just want to be very clear that, as I said, this is more getting introduced as a companion tool to manage and mitigate any kind of constraints that your systems may experience. But behind the scenes, this is not really checking for any license or any such thing in order to impose any additional constraints over the system. So I just want to be absolutely clear about it. And this is also not meant to be a refactoring effort in terms of looking and guiding you in terms of any kind of bad logic or code, because just the sheer combination of different environments and the variability in the workloads itself is large enough that the throttling manager is not going to be able to provide directly any kind of correlation to how to better design the system or code or anything. However, this could give you additional signals as you look into the data to help you understand which of those requests are frequently getting throttled or likely to get throttled. And depending on the context that you have, which is very close to your business, you would be able to make certain decisions beyond just setting the priority for this request to actually even go and understand if there are alternates in terms of design patterns and other things that you can adopt. So this is a quick view. So I'll also walk you through the screens of how you set this up in your environment. It's pretty straightforward. And these applies to the OData and custom services you've enabled in your environment. So your admins can actually go set this priority for you, and it's based on user ID. So obviously you can select a user ID that is set up to run certain workloads for you, or you can also use the service principal associated to any of these requests that you have. And today, this is enabled in what we call as telemetry and simulation mode, and it's been in this state since about September of last year. And what we are doing in this period of time is essentially giving you an early indication of how your system would perform and what are the likely requests that would get throttled if throttling were to be enabled by default in your environments. And there is a view in LCS where you can actually today go see that those list of requests, so that you can start to understand and plan for how to set the relative priority for this request as and when you are ready to actually enable this by default in your FNO environment. So the steps of setting up is, as I said, it's extremely simple. It's just a couple of clicks here. So you go to System Admin, you click on this throttling priority map, which has existed since product update 37, I believe. So this is there, and what you will see is a view where you can actually go select the user ID or the client principal, and you set the priority. So right now in telemetry mode, these are what we call the priorities are set to default. So you will not be seeing any of these 429 actual messages coming in your, sandbox or production environment, unless you actually go manually change the priority to either high, medium, or low. So when you set those things up, then you are basically moving away from telemetry or simulation mode to then actual mode where the 429 will start to come in. But we encourage you to actually do that in your pre-prod environment so that you are ready to actually work on your 429 handlers and test it so that you're ready when the solution becomes default in product update 43, which is what I'm going to get through in the next slide. So as I said, this has been in public preview or public review since PU 37. So it's been there for a very long time. And during this time, obviously, in addition to showcasing what requests might get throttled in your environment, we on the product side have been collecting a lot of information and details and looking at how to adjust some of these limits, if you will, from behind the scene, and also taking an inventory of the amount of environments that would be subject to the throttling, and also proactively reaching out to a lot of customers and having conversations about their environments and understanding more of their workload patterns and design patterns and exchanging some ideas on how they could be mitigated. But the system goes into, or the feature goes into full effect, starting with product update 43, which is 10.0.19. which is available for pre-prod environment starting April 23rd, and then for your production environment starting June 18th. So which essentially means that you have the necessary time between wherever you are right now with your product updates and versioning until you get to PU 43 or 10.0.19 in order to be enabled to actually handle for these 429s. That means start taking the action today in other versions that you are in so that you can test and validate that in your sandbox environment. And as your team is ready to pick up on the 10.0.19 update, you're actually then ready to be handling 429s by default in your production environment. So that's the call for action. And of course, we are here to support you through anything that you find interesting in your environment. So if you are already a fast track customer, you could work through your solution architects for connecting with us, or we have enabled a lot of channels for you to actually connect with us. So one such thing is obviously these tech talks. So even though the feature goes live, soon, we'll continue to have some of these tech talks even well into next month, so that there's an opportunity to connect and share other information. But at the same time, we also have a Yammer group, and we've had some good connections there and good feedback and good engagement for some of the partners and customers on the Yammer group. We also have public documentation FAQ that will get updated as part of the GA plans. And then starting last month, we also opened up weekly office hours. And there is a session that's suitable for APJ and MEMA, and then another session on Wednesdays that's more suitable for Americas and EMEA. So today's session got swapped with this tech talk, but these are the different channels through which you can obviously reach us, and we can have that conversation. And of course, you have all our contacts and information. You can always email us, and we can have that connection as well to see if there are some common patterns that we can learn from you and your workloads, and how that might keep us informed about potentially future tweaks and implementations that we'll be making to the throttling manager, and this will be a great channel for us to collect and synthesize all that information. Okay. With that, I do want to move to now Q&A. So that was just the presentation part of it. But as we get to Q&A, and as Sneh, Saurav, and Nina help with some of the questions that you have, I leave the resources slide open here so that this is there. But you can also reference back to this when a session is posted. There are also previously recorded sessions, so you can always go and grab this information from there. But with that, I'll just leave this as a background so that we can switch to the Q&A session. So Nina, do you want us to just switch us to the Q&A session, please?
Sure, yeah. I think if you guys have any questions you want to read out loud and answer, feel free. Just note that there is a little bit of a delay between what attendees see from us. So if you're asking for clarification there.
Great. So Sneh or Saurav, if you're monitoring the Q&A, just read it out loud. And if it's something that you can answer, please go ahead and answer. If not, you could ask me for related to product roadmap or any other questions to me, and I'm more than happy to respond to that.
Hey, Srinath. Yeah, so one of the common question that we're seeing is around how basically customer can monitor their throttling events, how basically they can be prepared about this. I think that is one of the common question that we are seeing. Yeah, maybe you can answer to that.
Yeah, so I'll use this as a visual to that. So obviously today you can go into your LCS environment for any sandbox environment and the production environments that you have. You should start to see a view that is similar to this here. So obviously this is an internal test system, so you can see some of the request URLs there that is showing the relative priority in which it's getting throttled, but in your case it will show as default. So essentially in this view you can get to see the different OData or custom services in the environment that would be candidates for throttling, if you will, when the feature goes live with PU43. Any other questions, Saurav?
Yeah, there was one question around DMF. I think question was like if this particular throttling is going to impact DMF integration or not. So if those are using custom service or OData endpoint, yeah, those will be throttled, considered for throttling.
Yeah, so think of any OData custom services that you have in your environment as potential candidates for throttling. The only exception being that internal Microsoft services such as WHS Mobile or DRA services or retail, if you're in retail, are by default exempt from getting throttled because you as an end user will not have the opportunity to set any relative priority. So those are the ongoing conversations that we have internally with these various service teams, so that they are actually working with us to help mitigate any kind of throttling scenarios that may experience in the future. But as of right now, many of these internal services are exempt from getting throttled, so you don't have to worry about them. Just focus on your OData endpoints and custom services by setting relative priorities for them. Any more questions?
Hey, Srinath, there is one more question about DualRight. I think this has come multiple times. Yeah, we can answer to that too.
Yeah, so DualRight, we have not observed DualRight that frequently show up in our telemetry as one of the services that would be subjected to throttling. Very, very small percentage we saw. But as I said, we will be setting high priorities for any internal services, and we will be filtering some of these out from your LCS because we will be handling that as part of the feature itself going live. So these are some of the learnings and tweaks that we've made and adjusted as part of gearing up to a GA plan. So, but that should not be impacting you. Saurav, any other details you want to add from an engineering standpoint on these internal services?
Yeah, the only thing is, yeah, so as of now, we have white tested few of the internal teams for our initial GA. So those won't be subjected to throttling. And that doesn't include DIXF and DualRight or CDS FNO integrations.
Great. Okay, we'll probably give a few more seconds to see if anybody else has any questions, or Nina, you can come back and help us close out in a few seconds. Okay, Saurav, if you're not seeing anything, can we ask Nina to close out?
Yep, just give me one more minute. There are a few open questions. Let me quickly go through them. I think one question is about the impact on on-prem systems.
Yeah.
Whether this throttling is ever applicable for on-prem or not.
Yeah, it's not applicable for on-prem at this time. Sorry, there was a voiceover or feedback. I don't know if you could hear that. Saurav, maybe you can repeat that answer or response.
Yeah, yeah. So on-prem as of now are not subjected to throttling. It's only for cloud-based environments. That is one. And there is one more question about how customers would be able to auto retry or handle this particular HTTP throttling code. So we have a public documentation. Maybe I can share that as part of the response.
So on that, I also want to add, based on some prior questions, is that we strive to make sure that the retry interval is well within a reasonable time. So let's say 0 to 60 seconds. Now, we've had some engagements with other customers and partners where if it's beyond certain retry interval, the time duration, it's not acceptable for their business performance or end user experience. So our guidance there is obviously those retry intervals are there for your interpretation and your usage based on the scenario that you're trying to serve the customer. The example in which I'm talking about is a retailer who has a kiosk experience. And if there are system constraints and a customer is standing in front of a kiosk, they obviously don't want to have the customer wait beyond a certain period of time. So obviously, this partner already have thought through what that experience would be or could be today, even without these service protection settings kicking in. So in that dialogue, we arrived at the right way to then do that is that while the throttling manager is suggesting a dynamic retry interval, you can always extend your 429 handler to have other custom logic that you want to have to determine whether that's an acceptable time or do you want to fall back on any previously defined experience that you have. So these are some considerations for you to take into factor when you look for that retry interval value and then assess whether that is within an acceptable, customer experience or business experience you want to provide.
Yeah, and Shina, there is one more question about. So I think we have few integrations like logic apps, and there are few more external integration, and those have some kind of limits at their side. So any change being brought with this throttling on them? Like for example, for logic app, it's 200 calls per 60 seconds.
No, we are not. This is not even acting at that level. This is acting much at a higher level. So as long as your request has entered the system and it's processing through the different integration layers, whatever mechanism you have in place today to handle timeouts based on those integrations or any other Azure services based limits, those are all will continue to exist, and it will be handled through you for your integration. So the throttling manager is really not imposing or even playing a role at that point in time.
Srinath, there are a few questions for any way to know like why the request has been throttled through LCS.
Is this similar to the response I gave earlier, where anything that might show up in LCS would be subject to throttling if those conditions persisted in production, or is it slightly different, Sneh? So I'm not seeing the words on the question.
Actually, it's quite similar.
Okay.
Yeah, that would have answered this question also.
Are there some more, Sneh?
Yeah, Srinath, we are answering those
Okay,
on
got
the
it.
chat.
Yeah.
I think we are good. Most of the questions are covered, and there are few open one. We can take those offline.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, if there are any outstanding questions, we can post those responses back to the Yammer group, or as I said, if you have any specific questions related to your environment or observations that you have, feel free to join us on office hours, because it gives us a more one-on-one interaction, and also for us the opportunity to connect and learn more about your environment. And that can also help us understand and help us with our planning for updates to throttling as we go forward. So thanks for all your questions, and thanks for the good engagement. So Nina, if you don't mind, you can close it off. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, and thanks everyone for joining. I posted a link to a short survey in the Q&A panel. We'd like your feedback on today's session and to hear what you'd like to see in future events. Thank you for your participation. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters and audience for joining us today.